time out of their busy day to attend the webcast today, part 1 of our 2-part webcast series, Modular Product Transparency, Have It Your Way. I'm going to start by giving you a quick overview of who is Sustainable Minds. There are folks on the webcast who are new to us, as well as folks who are our friends and customers and partners. So we'd like to start out by just an introduction. Sustainable Minds is a B2B cloud provider of environmental product transparency applications, data, and services. And at the core of everything we do, and really our secret sauce, is knowing how to bring design and customer experience to solving complex technology and information problems. And you'll see that that really is kind of the underpinning of all of the work we're going to show you going forward. I'm Terry Swack. I'm CEO and founder of Sustainable Minds. And our first product we brought to market when we started the company 8 years ago was a cloud-based eco-design and LCA software tool for use in early-stage product development. We were the first to bring such a tool to market. And so we are a software company. We have software products like other companies like ThinkStep and Pray, although our software is not intended for the same use and therefore isn't a competitive offering to Gavi or SEMAPro. You'll see a little bit I'll talk about today. It's a single-figure score, cloud-based, easy-to-use tool for non-LCA experts, in contrast with a full complex LCA package. Now, as we understood how the market was evolving from wanting to design greener products and to report on those greener products, we saw the opportunity to bring the same thinking about making things easy and understandable to the reporting side of things, and to be able to do that in the context of industry standards, Sustainable Minds added Program Operator to our business model so that we could develop the transparency report framework and program that we're going to talk about today, and bring to you the transparency report, which is an ISO 14025 Type 3 environmental declaration. Now, again, we're a software company, and so the way we scale is through using technology to build products and services that other stakeholders and partners in the marketplace can also use and sell. So our model is we want to partner with all the service providers in this process of creating product transparency reports, so the providers and the deliverers of lifecycle assessments and the verifiers of those LCAs and those reports. So we look like different companies in the marketplace, but we're kind of a hybrid, and wanted to kind of lay that out so people understood where we sit. So what we're going to cover today is the backstory for how our transparency reports and transparency products have been developed, and our strategy going forward. We're obviously going to discuss our compatibility process, which we're certainly excited to share, and the comparative assessments we did with other PCRs, guidance, and standards to produce this compatibility appendix, and we'll talk about and show you what that is and how you might want to get one done for your favorite PCR, if there is such a thing, to have a favorite PCR. We're going to do a quick demo of TOTO's Lavatory Sync transparency reports, which really is a fantastic example of this idea of modular reporting. And then we're going to pose some questions. We'll really get into any kind of discussion because this webcast is one way, but we want to start to pose these questions in the marketplace about how do we ultimately get to a place where, as an industry, we are working in a way that's consistent, harmonized, and useful for all of the stakeholders to make it a process that is repeatable, scalable, and ultimately useful. At any point in time, if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box. We'll go to those at the end of the webcast, and if we don't get to them, we will certainly follow up and make sure all the questions do get answered. So I want to start with where are we today, because the USGBC announced LEED version 4 in 2012 and made product transparency really the cornerstone of this version, which was really thrilling, I think, for everyone who cares about making meaningful improvements in the environment. But, come what may, product transparency is still voluntary reporting. And what we've seen now that there's been some embracing of product transparency and some uptake, but really not the kind of I'll use the word explosion or high volume creation of product transparency documents that folks in the industry would have hoped would have happened by now. And there's really two sides of the coin. Because it's voluntary reporting, unless the folks doing the reporting can make a viable business case for doing it, it will continue to remain optional, and it won't happen. And while LEED is the primary driver, there are other drivers, but ultimately being able to make real the vision that was laid out initially requires pretty fundamental changes to the way that process happens, and that whole process and solution set needs to be scalable and results driven. And you're going to see, the rest of the presentation is about, it can't be about reporting for reporting's sake. It has to have a whole lot more meaning and value to all of the participants. So the other challenge is, AEC professionals have really been terrific about saying, yes, we want product transparency. We are really going to make an effort to prioritize this, learn about it, go to conferences, support manufacturers who are doing it. But the fact of the matter is that the way that disclosures get delivered today, because they're so technical and they are disclosures, they're very difficult, if not impossible, for non-technical people to use to make informed specification or purchase decisions. And further, these folks really can't easily find these disclosures and use them in a streamlined way to specify into projects and get the credit for specifying those projects. And the information is nowhere and everywhere. And further, it's encoded in PDFs, which we all know is pretty quickly making that data not useful in any other type of application in which it's being so highly desired. And particularly if the vision is to get to whole building modeling or whole building LCA, the data, the separation of form and content really has to become a high priority. So the bottom line is people really need to be able to find the information and use the information for product transparency to really scale and come to the fruition that we're all hoping for. So our opportunity collectively is to make product transparency understandable and useful and usable, and create the things in a way that people want them and need them. Make manufacturers' investments pay off, and provide solutions that are cost-effective, easy for the sales folks and marketing folks in the manufacturing organizations to use them, not only in product development, but now in product marketing and in sales, and to help those manufacturers build credibly greener brand and take a market leadership role. And really what users want is understandable product information to make project decisions, and they want the information to be understandable, free, and findable. So last year we introduced this idea of integrating product transparency into product marketing, and it came as a result of really looking at this word disclosure. And I remember having conversations with people, and they were using the word disclosure to refer to EPDs and other reporting documents. And there was something about that word that just didn't sit well with me, and I went and looked it up. And sure enough, synonyms for disclosure are words like confession, exposure, betrayal. None of the kinds of things manufacturers really want to do when it comes to talking about their products. And because we've been in the helping manufacturers design greener products business for 8 years, and our original premise was that environmental performance is just the latest criteria in product development that sits alongside functional performance, cost, aesthetics, safety, all the traditional criteria, it's now the latest criteria in product marketing. People make decisions using those same criteria and now this additional one. And so why would information about environmental performance be published in a separate place or provided separate and apart from all of the information people really use to make purchase decisions or specification decisions? And when there's environmental performance information to be shared, it becomes a really valuable part of the whole story. And real marketing is about communicating what's true, and ultimately, like to say, just box checking isn't going to satisfy the real demand for transparency. And so communicating real and true information about what a manufacturer is doing is really cause for promotion and celebration, actually. So our value proposition to manufacturers around product transparency is that it helps build credibly greener brands. And the value for manufacturers to provide this kind of information about their products is to build a credibly greener brand by actually demonstrating they know what they're doing, not just going through the motions, not just reporting for reporting's sake. And so making greener purchase decisions requires understanding that information and making that information meaningful to the purchaser. And if that happens, then truth builds trust, trust builds powerful brands, and powerful brands create preference and value for their companies. So our whole approach to our transparency products is based on that premise. Product transparency is high value. If you can make it understandable and meaningful, it will build a credibly greener brand and build a market for your products. So going back a few years earlier, back to 2013, when the USGBC had announced the product transparency credits, we decided to do a pretty significant research study looking at the current state of the EPD marketplace. And we did this study in 2013, and we looked at about 40 different EPDs and other documents that were used by manufacturers in lieu of EPDs to report environmental information. And what we found, not surprisingly, was that most of them were too long, not useful to make decisions, and were never intended to do that. So, therefore, it's an observation, not a criticism. The ones that were too short weren't EPDs, because there's a very prescriptive recipe for creating an EPD that we'll get into. They're very technical, again, because they are designed to be technical documents. Tons of LCA information that a non-technical reader couldn't really ever hope to comprehend. Other environmental data that really not in a context no product marketing information or very little, and everybody knows they're not comparable. So we kind of came away from this research study begging the question, well, how does an architect, builder, or contractor use an EPD to make a purchase decision? And our research conclusions, back in 2013 were that the current PCR EPD process was never going to be able to keep up with the demand for product transparency that we in the marketplace and the USGBC and other green building rating systems were hoping to accelerate. And so what we understood was, this increased demand for transparency and greener products was going to require a comprehensive solution. Changing one thing in a system, especially in a complex system, isn't going to have a big impact. We also know that better design makes the complex clear. We also knew we had to provide real advantages over how things are done today if people were going to look at doing things in a new way. We also felt really strongly about this point number 4, that any kind of a program that was going to be scalable and evolve with its stakeholders had to be designed to allow for continual improvement based on stakeholder participation and learning and industry engagement. That it's kind of not fair to ask people to go through a technical process and kind of cast those rules in stone for 5 or 10 years when the following year or the year after that there could be some pretty significant changes or learnings as more people get involved. So I feel that's pretty important. And then finally, really focusing on the benefits that the solution provides to all the stakeholders versus the process of itself. And when you decide to focus on the benefit, really at the end of the day, it's all about the report and how the information is delivered. So everything that happens in advance of the report is a means to an end. It's in service of getting to that information that needs to go in the report. And so our motto became, let's keep the science. LCA is the undisputed method for measuring the relative greenness of products and systems. Let's just re-engineer the process. So we introduced our transparency report. It's our brand of EPD, and now one can be created using any new or existing PCR. And the whole intent is for manufacturers to be able to leverage their investment in LCA to create credible, consistent, and affordable marketing tools to effectively present the greener brand. I like to throw this slide in only because folks have said, why are you calling your report a transparency report? Isn't it an EPD? And here on the first page of 14025, it says a program operator can call their report anything it likes. And in fact, EPD or Environmental Product Declaration is kind of at the end of their list of examples. And we decided that we wanted to call our report something different to indicate that there was something different about it. And so I really just want to reinforce a transparency report is an ISO 14025 Type 3 environmental declaration. But we committed to ourselves after this research study that it could be done in 3 pages. It doesn't need to be 10 pages or 15 pages or 20 pages. It could be 3 pages, and page 3 even could be optional. And so we decided everything somebody would want to know is going to be on page 1. So everything they want to know to make a purchase decision, the functional information, the aesthetic information, the environmental performance information, all on page 1. Then on page 2, we're going to provide the LCA results and the interpretation of those results in very plain language, graphical representation. What was the scope of the LCA? What were the results? What do they mean? And where are the greatest impacts occurring in the life cycle of this product? And finally, all the reference and technical information and the value in the rating systems. Page 3, again, is optional, but this is where it gets very interesting, where a manufacturer has the opportunity to talk about what they're doing in any or all life cycle stages of their product to create the kind of improvements and the differences that actually can get talked about here on page 2. So just to go into the technical underpinnings of the content requirements for a transparency report, what we did was after that EPD research study, we went to the ISO 14025 language and looked at the 6 types of information required to be a Type 3 environmental declaration. Company and product identification, issuing party information, LCA results, variations that drive performance, relevant additional data and certifications related to environmental performance, and relevant product manufacturing strategy about environmental ambitions and programs. What we did was we articulated each piece of content that needed to be in the transparency report by design to meet the 14025 requirements, and then in addition to meet our goal of making it comprehensive and understandable. And in fact, this column describes a little bit about what the data needs to be or do to actually communicate well. And the core of it is really getting very, very focused on exactly the information that was going to be used to report those LCA results in a way that was comprehensive and meaningful. And we created a template for page 2, and this template now gets repeated in all of the transparency products, where the technical scope and attributes of the LCA are on the left side, the interpretation are on the right side, the detailed data, references, and links to rating systems. Now here's an example of how we've tried to make LCA more understandable by bringing the technical information through our transparency report framework. Our PCR program uses EN 15804 as a reference for how to report the LCA in a modular way, using the system boundaries as described there. So you have the life cycle stages and you have the information modules within each life cycle stage. So here in the transparency report, we bring that framework through and in a glance allow the user to see which life cycle stages were included in the LCA, which information modules were included. And here in the bottom of the page, which is an accordion fold page, we present Tracy results aggregated by life cycle stage. And to roll it all up, our transparency report program is an innovative PCR EPD process to standardize and make product transparency reporting understandable and meaningful, and there's 3 parts to it. The first part is a 2-part PCR program that standardizes how PCRs can get developed at the product group level. The next is the report, which is in the cloud. It's a lead generation tool. It's modular, which we'll get into, and ultimately resides in a brand manufacturer showroom where all the information can be found. It's freely available, again in the cloud. And we give the manufacturer their LCA data back into our EcoConcept and LCA software. Now that the interpretation, the LCA has been done, the interpretation has been done, there's the opportunity for the product development teams now inside the manufacturer's organization, whether they're business people, technology people, engineering people, to be able to collaborate and really generate new concepts for where meaningful performance improvements can be had. And so this is a quick overview of our transparency products. Ultimately, with all of this thinking behind us, we can really take any standard or any report type or any set of data requirements and turn them into a standardized, understandable, modular approach to building a report so that all the information that somebody needs can be found all in one place in the cloud easily and understandably. And, you know, we get asked this, and so we turned around to, you know, ask manufacturers. You know, there's a lot of manufacturers who have invested a significant amount of time and dollars into product transparency, and you know, managing that information once they've created it and distributing it and training people on it, and having a plan in place for how to actually create more, again, in a streamlined, cost-effective way, is really on everybody's mind. So those folks who have gotten started, kudos, and for those of you who are continuing to figure out you know, how to sustain that momentum and make it part of the way you do business, we are here to work with you to address exactly that set of challenges that you're facing. So to wrap up this section, this is how we think about the products that we bring to market, and the value that we bring to our customers. And the big idea is that we help product manufacturers make greener product decisions, both in product design and in product marketing. And manufacturers can start wherever they like. You can start by figuring out how to design a greener product, make one, and go out and report. Or you can respond to the demand for product transparency and start by creating a PCR, doing your LCA, creating a report, putting it out in the marketplace, and ultimately continuing to design greener products, make a greener product, and then when you go out to report again, you can start talking about the things you're really doing to make meaningful improvements in your products. And so in this example, what we're showing you is we created our transparency report framework and program. It became a program operator so that we could create a more concise, scalable, streamlined process and set of deliverables for reporting environmental performance. When we went and looked at the other side of product transparency, the other significant set of credits in need for material ingredient reporting, which, by the way, will be our next webcast on Friday, you know, there were certainly plenty of programs and standards that had already been identified by the USGBC to use for reporting, and so, you know, we didn't feel any requirement to go recreate that. We'll just use those existing standards, try to understand what's similar or different about them, and then create one standard way to use the data from any of those report types so that any manufacturer can use any of that information to plug it into a standardized report and make it available in the cloud. So what you could say is Sustainable Minds is really in the business of being a publishing platform for product transparency information. And someone made the comment several months ago, and I kind of liked it, so I'll reuse it here. You know, we're the Rosetta Stone of transparency reporting. We have the ability to take a lot of complexity and simplify it so that people from all different parts of the stakeholder process can talk to each other and understand what's being said. So to wrap this up, I'm going to make an analogy and get back to this idea about what's a disclosure. So the deliverable of an LCA, which is a disclosure, is an LCA report. That is the disclosure, it's the report. An EPD is a report of the LCA report. So people ask, why are they still so long? Well, the answer is that because they're still disclosures, and because the definition for the content requirements that go into that disclosure has been done by technical people, there's a lot of belief that lots of technical information should also be made available publicly. So this is where we're going to get into that big discussion. Again, a life cycle assessment is a transparency report in the same way we talk about our material health overview as an HPD is to a material health overview. These are disclosures, and now these are marketing tools. So what is product transparency in our compatibility process? When we talk about modular product transparency, again, it means a manufacturer being able to assemble any and all of the information they want to be able to provide all in one place, whether it's environmental performance information, water footprinting, carbon footprinting, material evaluation. They should be able to use data and results from their choice of programs and ultimately be able to make a report that includes all this information that's compliant with any PCR technical standard or guidance document, and it should all be in one place in the cloud. This is our transparency report framework and program, our two-part PCR program. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but we will do more in the next version of this webcast next week, because we will be introducing our 2016 program documents, and they'll be available then. But very simply, a two-part PCR is designed to have all of the LCA calculation rules and report requirements in one document. And then any of the rules that are specific to the product group or the product category that the LCA is being done for is in a separate document. Now, we didn't think of this. This is happening in Europe. The EBU system is a two-part PCR. UL has imported that system and created their own two-part PCR. And we're going to actually look at the difference between our Part A and their Part A to kind of figure out how do we start driving down one street instead of multiple streets. But from a maintenance perspective, having a two-part PCR means that as the market evolves and we learn more about how LCAs want to get done by folks more consistently or harmonized with other programs, then this can be updated every year, and that's part of our governance documents. It gets updated every year through our technical advisory board and stakeholder process. And the Part B is what manufacturing groups and stakeholders and trade associations do to complete a full PCR. So a Part A and a Part B is a full PCR. And remember, we are very, very protective of the amount of life cycle assessment information that goes into a transparency report. Our litmus test is that any LCA information that goes into a transparency report must pass the test of furthering the understandability of the LCA results and the environmental impacts, and or how the manufacturer is making improvements to the product. And by the way, I wanted to point out, this is part of our Part A. Appendix C is the content requirements for what goes into a transparency report. So remember, Part A is the LCA calculation rules and report requirements. So Appendix C is the report requirements. And notice the report requirements are not laid out to look like a transparency report. I mean, it's literally a content inventory of the types of content in each category of content to ensure that it meets the requirements of 14025. I'm going to just skip over this a little bit. Our Part B, and again, we'll talk more about this next week, has been designed, again, to make it possible for groups of manufacturers to really focus on what they know most about, which is the products in their industry, and to be able to create rules at the product group level so that the rules for the LCA are getting created for products that deliver the same functional performance and would therefore compete for the same specification, therefore making it possible to actually have better and more specific results that are more meaningful to that type of product, rather than at a category level where there may be a lot of products that are grouped together for efficiency purposes, but not necessarily for delivering the best or most meaningful LCA results. So as more manufacturers are saying, geez, I want a transparency report, but there already is a PCR, we said, great. What we're going to do is come up with a way that anybody can create a transparency report using any existing PCR, because a manufacturer should now have a choice of how they deliver those results. If they want to deliver it in a strategic marketing tool that helps them build a greener brand and sell more products, or deliver an EPD, which is fine. They've been around for a long time. They'll continue to be around. But you should have a choice. You shouldn't only be able to create the one thing. And so the other thing to keep in mind is our framework is designed for use by any manufacturer in any industry for any product, not just building products. And again, the idea is to ensure the LCA rules are the same. Everybody's using the same LCA rules. Everybody's delivering the same report content because that's prescribed in the PCR. It's just the difference in the way that information gets delivered. So here's the case study. Here's where we actually had the opportunity to figure out how we're going to do this and bring it to market really as a pilot. So think of this as a pilot for our compatibility process. And it actually also turned into a little mini pilot for us as we evaluated the USGBC new EPD guidance, and we'll share those learnings with you as well. So what the case study is, we've been doing lots of transparency reports and material health overviews for TOTO, and TOTO went ahead and worked with the industry to create 5 product group definitions, or Part Bs. But at the same time, UL was working to import the Sanitary ceramics PCR from the EBU system and brought that to market. Here's their 2-part PCR. And in that Part B, there's a line of content with a use cleaning scenario for lavatory sinks. We said, all right, well, this is great. We're going to use this PCR for the lavatory sinks transparency reports and figure out what do we really need to do to make this transparency report be able to be verified to that PCR. And that's when we said, well, let's at the same time, let's look at this USGBC EPD guidance and essentially just kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So what we did, because any framework that's prescriptive is also a good analysis tool. So what we did was we took Appendix C from our Part A, again broken down by the content types in the Type 3 Environmental Declaration, and went through the PCR, Part A and Part B, UL's PCR, and just literally put in the additional content requirements from that PCR that wasn't already called for in the transparency report content requirements. So we're calling these additional content requirements from the UL PCR. We went and looked at a PCR, we went and looked at an EPD that UL had created to that PCR so we could understand how they implemented or created content according to that PCR. We went through and we identified all those additional pieces of content, how they implemented it, and added that additional content to our compatibility comparison tool, and found quite a bit of additional content that was required in that PCR that was not already required in a transparency report. That was pretty interesting. So we said, all right, we're going to do the same identical thing to the USGBC guidance document. Same thing. Went through the guidance document, looked at the additional content requirements from the guidance document, and populated this right-hand column to determine what was being asked for, what's the USGBC going to be asking manufacturers for to put in their EPDs that we didn't already have in a transparency report, so that manufacturers can choose to be compliant with that guidance optionally if they would like to or not. And so we are staying true to our core commitment, though, which is to provide concise, understandable, and meaningful Type 3 environmental declarations. And so it was not an option for us to take this additional content required by PCRs and guidance documents and find a place in page 1 and 2 of the transparency report. So we said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all that additional content and we're going to put it on a page 4. So that was the only rule that we broke, the promise that we broke to ourselves, because we said a transparency report can be done in 3 pages, with page 3 optional. So we said, all right, fine. It can be done in 4 pages, and page 4 is optional. So half the transparency report is optional. And so now a manufacturer has as much choice about what they're going to report or not, depending upon the PCR they're going to use in the guidance documents that they also want to be compliant with. We also said that, look, ultimately, the data that's in the cloud needs to be able to be used in other types of calculations and applications, and we don't want the information that people are going to use to make a decision that we're trying to keep concise and understandable. We don't want all the additional information to get in the way of that. So this page 4 is available in the downloadable PDF of the transparency report. That's available from every transparency report that's online. Page 4 is not online. It's in the downloadable PDF. So you can kind of think of this as kind of a reverse engineered, re-engineered brief, where in the USGBC guidance there was the suggestion that a manufacturer consider making a brief in addition to the full EPD for the very reasons we've been talking about. We've said, look, no, just create one Type 3 environmental declaration, but prioritize the content that people can use to make decisions, which is its purpose, and put all the other information that is being asked for a variety of reasons. Let's put that in essentially the back matter of the report. And so this is how we've been able to introduce the first transparency reports that are compliant with both UL Parts A and B for sanitary ceramics, as well as the USGBC guidance, and it also includes a material health overview. And that's a lot of content. This is the image that we put in the invitation. We will go live and take a look at it in just a minute. But it is a lot of content, right? Here's the dashboard, here's page 2, here's the material health overview using Declare, again with the same scope of the assessment, with the interpretation, what they're doing to make it healthier, what they're doing to improve overall in the life cycle of their products, and page 4. Now that got us curious. We said, now we're on a roll. How difficult would it be to just start evaluating other PCRs or other standards, other guidance documents, because different program operators in different parts of the world are using different standards or are preferring them. Some manufacturers are preferring one over another. Now various industry groups will be bringing out their own guidance, and so there's going to be a lot of choices or flavors of disclosures that different folks will be wanting to ask manufacturers to provide. And so, Sustainable Minds is not in the business of deciding what information to report. If the market says, hey, this information should be reported, we'll figure out a way to make it reportable, but in a way that is consistent with our core values and our mission. And so we said, all right, well, let's look at what's going on here, because our framework is based on EN 15804, which we generalized and regionalized for North America. But let's actually look at EN 15804, because the UL PCR was based on that, as is the USGBC guidance. So let's just compare them and see what's the same or different. So we took the page 4 from the TOTO report that now, again, has all the additional content from the UL PCR and the USGBC guidance, and we started to overlay, okay, what's the same or what's different? And so what we're showing you here is that with EN 15804, what's different about what we showed, what we already had, was there's a slightly different set of requirements for the scenarios, slightly different environmental parameters, and disaggregated impact categories for both CML and Tracy. Here in the USGBC guidance, the scenarios are a little bit different. There's this requirement for data age, the requirement for data set details, environmental parameters per EN 15804, and these disaggregated Tracy results. Here in the ULE Part A and B for sanitary ceramics, life cycle information, data age, data quality, scenarios, allocation, those are all requirements. And so if you put them all together, what you've got is the only thing, what you've got is a lot of similarities. And the only thing that is specific to the USGBC guidance that is not in EN 15804 or the UL Parts A and B is data age. So, what we summarized is that, these are requiring a lot of additional information in an EPD. And USGBC is requiring the data set details. They're requiring disaggregated Tracy results. So this is going to be a discussion. ULE Parts A and B, these are the unique things they require, but they do not require disaggregated results. And both of these are requiring data age. Now, what we also went and looked at was, well, how different is ISO 21930 from EN 15804? And it's fairly different. This whole section is pretty different than what's in EN 15804. And these are a little bit different as well. So when we publish our 2016 program documents, we'll also write a short piece about why some of the requirements from the USGBC guidance did not get put into Part A, our 2016 Part A. Some of it did. This is what I meant earlier about every year we update our framework, things that make sense to go into Part A to stay consistent with the industry not just the building product industry, but any industry. Because remember, our program is not specific just for building products. All right. So how do we add stuff that makes sense for everybody, but to keep separate things that we don't think help everybody else out, and also can be considerable maintenance tax on maintaining a PCR program. So when we introduce our new program documents next week, we'll be introducing a new document, which is our Part A PCR compatibility appendix document. And it will include appendices for the UL Parts A and B, NSF architectural coatings, and the ASTM Portland and other cements PCR that will have the compatibility document for the USGBC guidance, these two international standards, as well as the compatibility appendix evaluation form or creation form, so that more PCRs can be used to create transparency reports. It's actually a little technical to do the comparison, but not hard, and we invite any LCA provider, any program operator, any manufacturers group who would like to make the transparency report option an option for themselves or for industry. We invite you to start creating compatibility appendices, and we can also work with you to get those created. So to summarize, these appendices were designed to easily enable the use of any existing PCR to create a transparency report, and optionally choose to be compliant with other international standards or guidance documents and to ensure that all the manufacturers who are reporting those particular kinds of products or product groups use the same LCA calculation rules, report the same content, but have an option now of the format they use to report it. Which really brings me to the discussion questions that we'd like to have this conversation over the course of the year leading up to Green Build and the no backwards compatibility to LEED version 4. How as an industry are we going to get aligned around making this opportunity something that really realizes finally some explosive growth, so that more manufacturers are making greener products, those products are getting purchased, and more greener buildings are actually getting built. So let's start asking the question, how much of the content of an LCA should be required in an EPD? If all that information is already in the LCA, and by the way, in the transparency report program and framework, the manufacturer is required to have a publicly available LCA available if requested, and it can certainly be redacted and confidential information removed, but there is one that does need to be available, and that's not uncommon in other programs. So again, how much of the LCA's content should be required in an EPD? And let's start getting clear on, when and why is full compliance with EN 15804 required? When is ISO 21930 required? When would you use an existing PCR and optionally add additional content to be compliant with those standards? What content is actually useful to an AEC professional to make a better informed decision? And I know the AEC industry is really starting to work at and taking on that responsibility for coming back to industry and saying, here's what we want, and here's how we're going to use it. And so it's definitely a two-way street. We'd like to talk about the ACLCA created a PCR guidance document a while back. There's a working group. They definitely put a lot of effort into that, the checklist. So let's talk about how many guidance documents should there be, or can there be, from varying types of organizations, and what does the manufacturer do when those don't align? Which ones should people pay attention to, and why? And there were some very interesting comments that the ACLCA posed in response to the USGBC guidance about the question of limiting impact categories. Definitely some guidance that were in conflict with international standards. So again, really an important conversation to be having because we all want the same thing. At the end of the day, we really do all want the same thing, is for manufacturers to make credibly greener products, for us to understand how they're doing it, so that we get them specified into buildings that are higher performing. And really, the last piece of this is that as manufacturers have adopted, yes, we're going to make product transparency part of the way we do business, and they've started to train internal resources to gather inventory data, build models, do LCAs. Those folks will never be LCA consultants. They'll never be experts. And so how challenging is it for even an expert LCA provider, but now a whole new slew of folks who are trying to get this done inside of an organization? How are they going to be trained to understand the intricacies of the different technical requirements that are being put on them by all of these various organizations? So really the bottom line is, when does the industry get annoyed enough to solve these problems? What does annoyed enough look like? I know a lot of people are annoyed, so how do we actually get organized to solve these problems? And maybe we start with, which problems can we solve first so we can not feel like we have to put all the LCA content into an EPD? And what do we need to do to organize around the data problem? Everybody knows the data is a problem. How do we get data created so that it's available to everybody, not just in paid databases, so that we have a standard data set? These are big problems that as an industry we can be organizing around to solve. At the end of the day, what the market really wants and what the opportunity for all of us is to help manufacturers actually make greener and healthier products and not just report about them. We want both. We want actual products that are higher performing, and we want information that makes that understandable to us. And if that happens, those manufacturers will be able to create preference for their products, but it's going to mean educating the market to understand what the information means, which is the thing that will drive the behavior change. But then everybody benefits. Manufacturers can leverage their investments to get better results. Industries can play more appropriate guidance roles in PCR development. It's going to be easier for LCA providers, easier for decision makers to make decisions and reward manufacturers. And it's the green rating systems who are the big winners, that there's going to be a lot more information, a lot more transparent disclosure information to award decision makers for specifying those products into buildings so that more actually greener buildings get built. So we are at the top of our time, and I want to thank everyone who has stayed the course, which is surprisingly practically everyone. Most of the questions that got asked were answered. A few of them have to do with the materials ingredient reporting, and we'll be covering that this Friday. And so hopefully, if you haven't registered for this Friday's webcast, you can. We'll be repeating this webcast a week from today on Wednesday. But like I said, I'll be putting a little bit more information about the 2016 program documents, and we'll look a little bit more deeply at one of the compatibility appendices. And again, Friday, material ingredient reporting, and we'll do that a week from Friday as well. So on your way out, if you leave the webcast, there's a quick survey. We really do value your feedback and listen to it. Anything you have to say about what I said today or what we're kind of putting out in the marketplace, and we look forward to speaking with you and seeing you on our upcoming webcast. So thanks again. Have a great day.